It happened in a place where no one should ever feel unsafe, inside a hospital room with my pregnant wife hooked up to machines keeping our baby alive. And in that fragile silence, when every beep of the monitor was my only reassurance, the president of our neighborhood HOA walked in, sneered at the noise, and unplugged it. The sound of my son's heartbeat vanished. In that instant, I thought I'd lost everything. My name's David Thompson, and I never imagined my fight with the HOA would follow me into a hospital at 3 in the morning. My wife Emma was 8 months pregnant. She'd woken me up screaming in pain, clutching her belly, bleeding. I rushed her to Mercy General, every red light on that 20-minute drive feeling like a death sentence. I held her hand, promising it would be okay, even though I was terrified too. Doctors moved fast. Dr. Rodriguez explained the baby's heartbeat was irregular. Emma needed strict bed rest, constant monitoring. Any stress could make things worse. So we sat there in that sterile room, clinging to the steady beeping that told us our baby was still fighting. For the first time that night, I let myself breathe. And then the door opened. Margaret Stevens, HOA president of Pine Valley Estates. A woman in her 50s, always armed with a clipboard and an attitude. She'd been on our backs for months, complaining our front door was the wrong shade of blue, fining us for having flowers that were too bright, even threatening us over our barking dog. But at 3 in the morning in a hospital, I froze. "What are you doing here?" I asked. She smirked, said she was visiting her sister but couldn't resist stopping by when she saw my name on the patient list. And then, like it was the most normal thing in the world, she launched into our supposed HOA violations. I stared at her in disbelief. "My wife is in the ER. She could lose our baby, and you want to talk about paint colors? The HOA doesn't stop just because you have personal problems," she shot back. Emma, pale and weak, begged her to leave. "Please, Mrs. Stevens, not now. I'm really sick." But Margaret leaned closer. "No, this cannot wait. You've ignored my notices for weeks." Something inside me snapped. I stood up, ready to throw her out myself. That's when she looked around the room, wrinkled her nose, and muttered, "All this beeping is giving me a headache." And before I could stop her, she reached over and pulled the plug. The room went silent. The monitor flatlined. Emma screamed, "What did you do?" Margaret shrugged like it was nothing. "Just wanted some quiet so we could talk." My wife broke down sobbing, clutching her stomach. "You could have killed my baby. I need those monitors." I lunged for the machine, but Margaret stepped in front of me. "Sit down. We're having a conversation." That was the moment I felt it, that crushing wave of helplessness. My mind spun. Was this my fault? Had I let this HOA nonsense go too far? Had I been too passive, too willing to brush off her harassment? Now my wife was crying. My baby's heartbeat gone, and all I could think was maybe I'd failed them. For a split second, I wanted to collapse into the chair and give up. But then Emma looked at me, tears streaming, whispering, "David, I can't feel him moving." And that lit a fire I didn't know I still had. "Get away from my wife!" I roared, shoving Margaret aside so hard she stumbled. I plugged the monitor back in with shaking hands. For a few agonizing seconds, nothing. And then the faint, weak thump of our son's heartbeat returned. "The baby's in distress," I shouted just as Dr. Rodriguez burst in. When she realized the monitor had been unplugged, she looked horrified. "Who did this?" I pointed at Margaret, standing there like a smug statue. The doctor's face went cold. "That machine is life support. You could have killed this baby." Margaret rolled her eyes. "Don't be dramatic. It was only a few minutes." But Emma was already being rushed out for emergency testing. And I was done. I called hospital security, then the police. "I want to report an assault," I told them. "Someone just endangered my wife and child." Margaret was arrested right there in the waiting room, still whining about how ridiculous it was. "I'm the HOA president. I was just trying to talk." She had no idea I was a lawyer. No idea the hospital had cameras recording every second. No idea she had just handed me the kind of evidence that would bury her forever. I gathered everything, footage of her pulling the plug, medical reports showing the baby, went into distress testimonies from nurses and doctors. The story exploded through our neighborhood. Then the county paper ran the headline, "HOA President Arrested for Unplugging Life Support of Pregnant Woman." Soon it was all over the news. People were furious. Social media called her the HOA Karen who almost killed a baby. Neighbors started coming forward too. The Rodriguezes said she fined them for having flowers that were too colorful. The Pattersons told me she'd invented rules to punish Sunday family gatherings. The Johnsons said she even threatened to call child services because their kids played outside after 6. She wasn't just a bully, she was a tyrant, and now she'd gone too far. Weeks later, we were in court. Margaret had hired an expensive lawyer who tried to spin it. She didn't realize the machine was important, it was just an error in judgment. Nobody bought it. The video was clear, the audio was damning. In my opening statement, I laid it out. Ladies and gentlemen, the defendant deliberately unplugged life support equipment while my wife was having pregnancy complications. She risked my unborn son's life over a paint color dispute. Then I pressed play. The footage filled the courtroom, Margaret barging in, Emma begging her to leave me, shouting, and then that awful moment, the cord pulled the monitor going silent. Emma sobbing, "I can't hear my baby." The jury gasped. Some cried. One woman covered her mouth in shock. Margaret's lawyer tried to argue she didn't know better, but under cross-examination, I asked her directly, "Didn't Emma tell you the machine was tracking our baby's heartbeat?" "Yes." "And you still refused to plug it back in." I wanted to finish our conversation first. The room went dead quiet. She'd admitted it herself, she cared more about HOA fines than human life. The medical experts tore her defense apart. Dr. Rodriguez testified, even a few minutes without monitoring can cause brain damage or death. Nurse Williams said she'd never seen anything so reckless in 20 years. Every witness made it clearer Margaret's actions weren't just careless, they were lethal. Emma testified too. She told the jury what it felt like when the monitor went dark, how she thought she was losing our baby, how she begged Margaret and was ignored. There wasn't a dry eye in that courtroom. The jury didn't take long. 90 minutes later, the foreman stood. On the charge of reckless endangerment, guilty. On interfering with medical equipment, guilty. On assault, guilty. Margaret broke down crying, but it didn't matter. The judge's words cut through her sobs like a knife. You endangered a pregnant woman and her unborn child over a trivial neighborhood dispute. Your actions were criminal, morally reprehensible, and will not be excused. He sentenced her to 2 years in prison, 5 years probation, banned from ever serving on an HOA again, and ordered her to pay full restitution for our medical costs and emotional trauma. I watched her led away in handcuffs, still sputtering about misunderstandings. But everyone in that room knew the truth. She was a bully who finally went too far, and she lost everything. Sometimes the people who abuse power think they're untouchable. But when they cross the line, when they put lives at risk, the fall is fast and brutal. And Margaret Stevens learned the hard way that no HOA rule, no petty complaint is ever worth a human life.